The use of ambiguity provides an opportunity for interpretation and argument over a text. When there's room for this interpretation, different factors go into it. While many of a reader's external contexts come from individual knowledge and cultural milieu, a significant portion also comes from elements of a text which shape the internal context of a work. Executed well, an author's use of ambiguity can spark readers to take particular attentions to what they bring to a text, especially in terms of moral interpretations. In these ways, ambiguity through symbolic dialectic and moral strategies in Nathaniel Hawthorne's short stories, specifically in Roger Malvin's Burial, Rappaccini's Daughter, and young Goodman Brown, forces readers to craft their own conclusions through both introspection and speculation. Ambiguity in Roger Malvin's Burial is most prevalent when the reader is asked to discern at what point Reuben has crossed a moral line. Consider the linguistic choices that are not explicated by the narrative. In its opening, the story puts ambiguity at the forefront of the reader's minds, and Hawthorne evokes the uncertainty of interpretation. Describing stories as susceptible to interpretation and exaggeration, Hawthorne acknowledges the possibility for the narrator to impart judgmental effects. Many of these words suggest uncertainty and the prerequisite of sound judgment in order to properly appreciate the story and its context. One word communicates the ambiguous nature of Roger Malvin's Burial, judiciously suggesting that judgment must be made. The question then becomes, who is making that judgment? Ambiguity is furthered through the character of the narrator, highlighting his opinion towards Reuben. In some cases, the narrator implies disappointment, such as when he describes Reuben's torturous guilt. The narrator's disappointment is not localized to one section of the story, as the narrator frequently criticizes Reuben for moral shortcomings. This is inconsistent, however, and there is a shift in the narrator's opinions, which move from framing Reuben as justified to amoral. In some cases, the narrator co-opts Reuben's self-justification. The narrator's closeness is difficult to discern from Reuben's feelings when combined with this varied sympathy or antagonism. Having the narrator be opinionated helps to place Reuben's thoughts into the shade, where they belong in order to admire him at all. In writing with this narrative voice, Hawthorne uses a partial tone to imply that judgment should and is being made. It is through this that Hawthorne also imparts the moral questions of this story. What is the line being crossed? At what point does Reuben deserve the criticism of the narrator and reader? Because of this, Roger Malvin's Burial is impossible to read without being fenced in by ambiguity and therefore needing to impart judgment. Likewise, ambiguity is central in Rappaccini's Daughter. Framing the story is a cheeky self-reference by Hawthorne. A few key phrases highlight his self-awareness regarding ambiguity. The placement of this conveniently falls before a story which may be seen as commentary on an allegory as well as allegory itself. The relationship this story has to referenced works orbiting around the story through implied and explicit evocation, and the complications which arise from the use of the allegory at the heart of the narrative's question, finds the story richer despite its ambiguity. References to two other allegories in Rappaccini's Daughter are incorporated through a complex inversion in which the messages of the original stories are not comfortably ensconced. Though Dante's Inferno is evoked, the more accessible allegory of those referenced in Rappaccini's Daughter is that of the fall of humanity. Names from Eden are directly referenced early enough in the story to make the reader ponder their implications. In Rappaccini's Daughter, there are inversions of what one would assume about the Garden of Eden, and therefore the Garden of Rappaccini. Eden is well known for its bounty, luxury, and safety, yet the Garden of Rappaccini is one where danger lurks. The inversion of Eden into a place of malaise comes with the necessity to observe how Hawthorne places Edenic characters. Hawthorne lets the reader deliberate on who is who, though at one point the narrator interprets Rappaccini as Adam, other aspects of the story suggest Adam's allegorical parallel in the character of Giovanni. These are not deliberated for Hawthorne's readers, and must be deduced by evidence and story. However, direct comparisons should be noted, as they are what key the reader in that there is a deliberate choice to evoke biblical allegory. Ambiguity is also present in the two primary symbols central to Rappaccini's Daughter, the sibling plant of Beatrice and the Antidote. On Beatrice and the shrub, Giovanni notes a resemblance which Beatrice seemed to have indulged a fantastic humor in heightening. Much of the time spent on the flowers focuses on their gem-like physical beauty and the poison of their being. In contrast, Beatrice is associated with purity and guilt for her unfortunate physical being. Thus, Beatrice is drawn into the network of associations made by the shrub as a central, forbidden plant, pure and beautiful. Similarly, the vial of Antidote occupies confounding contradiction. The vial is purported to be the strongest antidote. Its description involves associations which complicate it. One little sip evokes just one bite from the forbidden fruit. Meanwhile, the text focuses on it as a purifying elixir. Baglioni suggests it can rescue and bring back this miserable Beatrice within the limits of ordinary nature. Despite care being taken to highlight the antidote as a force that could be misconstrued as purifying, it is the cause of Beatrice's death. Since both symbols toe the line between contradictory expectations, Hawthorne refrains from marking anyone as good, while offering hints at who may or may not parallel God or Satan. Though some interpretations open the way to seeing Rappaccini like the biblical God, his actions are portrayed in such a light in the narrative that one can also look at Rappaccini as Satan. The same can also be said for his rival Baglioni, who called loudly in a tone of triumph and horror for Beatrice's death, which he caused. Clean parallels do not exist in this story. We inevitably come to the story responsible for the phrase which summarizes Hawthorne's mischievous ambiguity: young Goodman Brown. In the conclusion of the story, Hawthorne again addresses the reader regarding his ambiguity. Be it so, if you will. This simple phrase is Hawthorne in a moment of linguistic clarity telling the reader to figure things out. Readers of Hawthorne's other works may be aware of more subtle appearances of these ambiguity acknowledgments, especially prevalent in his openings. One prominent image in young Goodman Brown is masking darkness. This is prevalent with the staffs of the traveler. Paired with a comparison of the traveler to young Goodman Brown, describing how they might have been taken for father and son, the narrator describes the traveler's odd staff as snake-like. This image is dismissed by a suggestion as to why it might be seen moving. It is surely nothing more than a trick of the dusk, itself a time of temporal ambiguity between night and day. Is it really a snake? In Hawthorne's words, be it so, if you will. Whether it is a snake, the trick of the light highlighted by it must remain in the mind of the reader, left to wonder if anything is trustworthy. Additionally, there are blurring parallels the narrative draws between Goodman Brown and the traveler, who is implied to have some connection to the devil. The inversion in the story brings to mind Rappaccini's garden, as this figure, who by serpentine association is drawn like the devil, is also described as apparently in the same rank of life as Goodman Brown. The narrator compares Goodman Brown to the traveler through choice of words and comparisons that must be interpreted. How is the reader to take this comparison when the traveler hosts a strange communion where the deep mystery of sin is being celebrated? The revelry is followed by Goodman Brown's own scarred behavior, despite, of course, the concern that perhaps he only dreamed a wild dream of a witch meeting. Though the event is thrown into question, veiled by murky lighting and images that refuse to be pinned down concretely, the effects of the dream are destructive to Goodman Brown. With all of his be it so, if you wills, and maybe snake staffs, Hawthorne encourages doubt while forcing his readers to chew on unpleasant thoughts. Is it all right to leave a dying man behind? Who is good when all are flawed, antidotes become poison, and the devil might be loose in Salem? Hawthorne's ambiguity isn't without concrete details, of course, but his style is enough to give readers anxiety over whether they are safe to trust him. He has thrown us judiciously into the shade, along with details readers are forced to question and ponder in the murkiest light. What are we to make of the inconsistencies of narration? The strange symbols which contradict their own associations? And was it a dream, after all? Thankfully, the generous Hawthorne has already provided us with the answer to all our questions. Be it so, if you will.